What's up, everybody? This is TheWon, aka Jodecideion on YouTube, and I'm bringing you another episode out from the side of my neck. The chicken or the egg, evolution or creation, science or God. Regardless of what you believe, it all started with an explosion, a gigantic flash of light, or a Big Bang. And it will end with something that is quite similar. Well, I'm here today to show you how we are now closer to the end of gaming than we are to the next evolution of it. All due to the decisions made by the powers that rule over this current generation of the gaming industry. So follow me as I explain the evolutionary scale of gaming consoles in today's episode, Out from the Side of My Neck, episode 27, the video game Big Bang. First, let me state, this will only cover the major players in the gaming industry. There have been countless companies to make hardware, but most of them end up failing. So I will only discuss the evolution of console makers who have been around for a long time and who have had a major impact in the gaming world. Let's start at the beginning of the modern age of gaming. The NES was an underpowered piece of hardware. It was actually using tech from the late 70s. Still, the content on the console is what kept it the hands-down winner over the Sega Master System, a superior piece of hardware. One of the main problems for being a video game hardware company is your only focus is to sell that hardware and to expand the user base for third parties to sell their software to. Once a third-party software company feel that you are no longer a viable market to support, they will pull that support. This leads to losing hardware company no current opportunity to make money. So you have two choices. And that's only if you are both a hardware company that can also provide software for that hardware. If you are only a hardware developing video game company, most likely you have to go the second route, which is to create a new market for yourself and for future third-party partners. So Sega decided to evolve or advance gaming by releasing the 16-bit Sega Genesis, which launched while the Master System was still on the market in the US, starting in 1987 to 1992. The Genesis launched in 1989 in the US 2 years after the release of the Master System. This marked the first time a console was dropped due to lack of success, leading to an advancement in technology that was forced, instead by the natural evolution of developers, studying the tech, learning how to create great software from it, coming to a point where they can produce high-quality games consistently, then finally the point of mastery, and those same developers needing and wanting new, better, and more advanced technology. The Sega Genesis is a success for Sega, since it offers new tech that game developers can use to create interesting and superior games. Third-party developers begin to shift their productions from 8-bit to the new 16-bit hardware. This leads Nintendo to finally begin production of their own new 16-bit machine, beginning what is now known as the fourth generation of consoles. Since Nintendo waited longer to enter the fourth generation, they were able to look at the Genesis, study its pros and cons, and then develop their own system, the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo had a superior sound chip system and superior colors. So in the end, most games sound better and look better on the Super Nintendo compared to the Genesis. This enabled Nintendo to get great content and ports of popular arcade games at the time, Street Fighter II being one of them. And eventually, this turns its tide for Nintendo, and they end up leading the fourth generation, even after being released years later behind the Sega Genesis. With that, the cycle begins again. Sega, hoping to gain market share lost to the Super Nintendo, opts to push video games further by adding to the overall power and performance to their hardware. The Sega CD launches in 1992, and then the 32X in 1994. Nintendo, true to their "it's not power that makes a console, but games," countered the Sega CD with their own Super FX chip. The Super FX chip was then implanted into new 16-bit Super NES software. This helps create more advanced games without the need of purchasing new hardware. Star Fox, Yoshi's Island, and Donkey Kong Country, to name a few. Nintendo wins the fourth generation by having superior games, once again. Sega prepares to move ahead again, this time to a true 32-bit console, the Sega Saturn. In the background, Nintendo has plans to release a CD add-on themselves, a partnership with Sony to make a Super NES add-on. The deal falls through, and the add-on never comes to be. Instead, Sony enters the gaming industry with their own video game console called the PlayStation, which is on the market around the same time as the Sega Saturn. The Saturn is stronger overall when you compare the two consoles. Still, once again, due to software, the PS1 leads and then wins the generation. Nintendo enters the fifth generation, and due to limitations of cartridges and backlash from third-party developers, cannot gain any ground on Sony. Nintendo holds its own and continues with the lifespan of the N64, even without the help of high-profile games from third parties. Nintendo developed their own hardware, but they are naturally a software company and the best in the world when it comes to making video games. And because of that, the N64 is able to stay on the market its entire lifespan, with only support from Nintendo. In the final attempt to gain former glory, Sega once again drops a platform for another. The Sega Dreamcast advances us into the sixth generation. The Dreamcast dies a short and horrible death due to lack of support from third-party developers who were still making great and popular PlayStation 1 games, and who were also preparing to move into the next generation with the PlayStation 2. In the end, Sega exits the console market to become a third-party software developer. All because the past years they kept producing new hardware, but not having a software to back it up. In the end, they were losing money both ways, which caused them now not to be able to afford to be a hardware-producing company. Sony and their PlayStation actually stabilized the console industry. Their consoles are never the strongest, but offer more non-game features, like the ability to play DVDs. Sony dominates the market for 10 years by using a strategy of multi-purpose hardware and a great selection of games. That is till Microsoft enters the gaming industry with their own home console. Microsoft released the Xbox in 2002. The Xbox at the time is the most powerful home console ever. Power that allowed the system to get ports of popular high-end PC games that the other consoles couldn't hope to run without losing some of the game's original content or quality. Even with all that power, the Xbox nor Nintendo's console, the GameCube, could match the overall appeal of the PlayStation 2, which won the generation with ease. 4 years after the launch of the Xbox, Microsoft pushed forward with their own 7th generation hardware. Microsoft creates and released the Xbox 360, the first ever home console to be able to support and produce HD graphics. This is the same tactic that Sega tried several times before when Nintendo was the market leader. But with new HD graphics, a superior online service called Xbox Live, and one of the leading new games in an up-and-coming genre called first-person shooters, which was Halo, the Xbox 360 becomes a hit with gamers and takes a hold of the new market. Not feeling threatened by Microsoft, though, Sony waits a full year to release their next console, the PS3. Nintendo also cuts their 6th generation console, the GameCube, life short, and also have plans for a new piece of hardware. Finally, in the month of November 2006, Sony enters the 7th generation with their PlayStation 3, a new hardware that uses Blu-ray disc. Sony stays true to their original plan, adding multiple extra features to their hardware. Blu-ray, DVD playback, the ability to add other software to their console, backwards compatibility, but they go overboard with the amount of power by using a new and powerful chip called the Cell processor. The potential power of the PS3 dwarfs that of the new 360. Something that would have taken an entire generation to be done, was done in a matter of a year. There's still a flaw though. With all that power, to obtain it, it comes at a steep price at retailers. Still, with over 200 past owners of PlayStation brand items, the PS3 is capable and ready to take over and retain its rightful place as the 7th generation leader. That is until 2 days later, Nintendo enters the 7th generation. The Nintendo Wii becomes the breakout sensation of the generation, the entire time using 6th generation tech. Instead of falling for the let us max out our hardware war, Nintendo decides to focus on another part of their hardware, the controllers. A device which has only been receiving updates by adding more buttons to it. Since the Wii was pretty much just a GameCube that had its power overclocked, Nintendo is able to sell it at retailers for a very reasonable price. The Wii costs almost half of what the current 360 or PS3 costs at stores. It was also fully backwards compatible to GameCube content, controllers, and games. So it was very attractive to past Nintendo owners and new Nintendo owners because of the cheap price. Throw in new games that take advantage of the Wii's motion controller called the Wiimote. The Nintendo Wii quickly surpasses the 360 in sales and becomes the overall leader of the generation. Part of the Wii's success was Nintendo's ability to find a new source of consumers to sell their console and games to. This new audience is known as the expanded audience. The Wii brings back lapsed gamers who stopped playing due to disinterest. The PS3 fails to gain any ground. The starting price for the hardware is too much for most past PlayStation owners to upgrade. The 360 is now cheaper and slowly but surely becoming the fan and software developer favorite. So they're losing ground and old members of their loyal fan base. We are now 4 years into the 7th generation. Nothing has changed for the industry. Price cuts, remodels, and new games have done nothing to help the HD consoles gain ground on the current leader, Nintendo. Nintendo in worldwide sales numbers are now 30 million ahead. It would seem at this point, with the HD consoles losing ground to the inferior Wii, and also losing money on every piece of hardware they sell due to the high prices, that maybe the old Sega philosophy was in order. Dump the hardware and get ready for the next round. Instead, both companies decided to copy the current leader's idea, introduce their own motion controls, hoping the sales would bring new interest to their console, allowing them to extend their lifespan on the market. But both HD systems were never in real trouble, thanks to the large amount of third-party support, making the Sega move an unnecessary tactic. They both could have easily just focused on software and accessory sales, making as much money as possible to finally move on to the next generation. Still, when you're losing money on hardware and respecting the industry, you have to do what it takes to change that. Sony and Microsoft both released their motion controllers to the market. Connect and move. Sony goes one step forward, adding even 3D to their games. This brings us to where we currently lie. If Microsoft and Sony would have waited for the next console cycle to introduce motion controllers, then it's possible that the overall home console evolution cycle could have been extended. Nintendo and their next console would finally be in HD, making every console on the market virtually the same, with maybe 3D being the new trend of the industry. The need to be successful now, all these advancements have been rushed out to the public. Take this even further back to when Sega was rushing into the 16-bit CD era and the Dreamcast. Gaming would be years behind its current pace, but have so much more life left in it. Seriously, sit back and think about it. Where can we go after this generation? What can we add to a home console that will make it worth upgrading to from our current consoles? If you're a Wii owner, you can look forward to finally HD graphics, finally a better online service, and the second generation of motion control games. If you're an owner of a 360, where can you go from here? Maybe Blu-ray? But that's really not anything that improved gaming. It's just a feature. If you're a PS3 owner, what can you add that they haven't added this generation? 3D is in the current PS3. So basically, the PS4 and a Xbox 720, they'll be virtually the same as our current consoles, unless something amazing happens within the world of technology, which it seems like we've totally caught up with. The visuals on consoles can't get any better. TVs can't display higher than 1080 currently, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. 3D is just now coming to effect, but the overall market for it is still years away. But still, Sony, thanks to their TV department and their console, is now pushing that now. So we're currently at a standstill technology-wise. There's nothing that can be added to the consoles to make them better video game consoles. And that creates even another problem. As you can already tell, Sony and Microsoft knows that the only way they can currently advance gaming, their platforms, their hardware, is by adding other features to it, other non-gaming features. And that's why they've stated the PS3 is not a video game console. The Xbox is not just for video games. They want to make the consoles more than that. But that comes at a price. Sony sells electronics. They're an electronics manufacturer powerhouse. They have movie divisions and TV divisions and all kinds of other hardware that they try to sell. And they use their PS3 brand, their PlayStation brand, to help sell those other products. So we can already see a future of a PS4 or PS5 being integrated into a Sony Bravia TV that displays 3D and HD through the system. How much is that going to cost us, the regular gamers, people who just want a game? Are you willing to pay that over $1,000 for that new system? For that TV that has the PS4 integrated into it? Are you willing to do that? Microsoft is a computer software company that sells their software to other companies that make computer hardware. So for them, the Xbox is just another piece of computer hardware that they're creating software for. Are you willing to pay that money for this other computer tower they're trying to create it to be, that has the interface with all their other components? Are you willing to buy nothing but Microsoft products that have shown to be faulty, that's come in with their first generation always having some kind of problem, not being reliable? And that brings even Nintendo at a crossroads, because they've personally always been a video game company that sells video games. They understand a video game is a toy. They understand it's for entertainment. So they try to keep it just that. And that's why the prices affect that. And then technology goes within it affects that. But if the other companies go in this other direction and the market follows them, then what can Nintendo do for themselves? Well, they too have to forego the main purpose of making their consoles for the games, to adding other technologies to it. You know, Google TV and all these other components that honestly a person who buys video games don't really need, because they don't add anything to your video game experience. And this problem has came to be all due to the fact that console makers, video game software developers have felt that its technology is what make great games, when actually it's great software, it's great games that make great games, and that what pushes technology. Go back to the Super Nintendo era, when Sega releases the Sega CD, bigger games, better CD quality sound, but still, a 16-bit game, Donkey Kong Country, was able to surpass anything they did on that superior hardware. At the time of its release, the Donkey Kong Country series visually rivaled some of the first-gen games on the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. Look at what Sony was able to accomplish with the PlayStation. Just allowing the games to dictate where the industry goes, it took over. It was able to control third parties and what the other hardware developers were doing. And that power Sony gained was also a catalyst into Microsoft pushing their agenda forward. Because the 360 comes to the market, and this is a superior piece of hardware, but it's still not getting the overall software the PS2 is getting, because it's a brand new platform with fresh new developers making games for it. Sony has a lockdown on third parties where they're getting exclusive games that the other consoles are not getting. And so what can you do when you're not getting the games to show how great your hardware is? Eventually you had to create your own market. And that's what Microsoft did by advancing forward to the 7th generation with the 360. Let me take you back in time with how things could have turned out if advancement, if technology wasn't being pushed forward due to lack of success. Imagine if Sega would have kept with the Master System and just worked on the games, and then eventually, even though they were still probably lost, introduced the Sega Genesis, but further along, not as quick as they did. Then this allows Nintendo to come in with a Super Nintendo, and you both compete for the same amount of years, pushing each other with great software, making great titles, like they did, but even better. And finally, to extend that era, you bring in a CD add-on, the Sega CD, which gives Nintendo probably the go-ahead to bring in the Super Nintendo add-on. And so the Super 16-bit era goes from being 5 to 6 years to maybe 10 years, because they're both competing equally and letting the software dictate where everything goes. This might not even bring Sony into the gaming industry. Sega might still be a player because they're now rushing hardware out every 2 years, losing money left and right. And even if the 16-bit mess happens and Sony does enter the industry with the PlayStation, they then compete with Sega and Nintendo on an even keel like they did. But Sega doesn't opt to the Dreamcast so early. They continue to fight because they were doing well in Japan. They were doing well in Europe. All that happens is games get pushed forward, better games, better quality games, and maybe Sega stays in the gaming industry and Microsoft doesn't enter. No matter how you look at it, no matter who would have came in or who wouldn't come in, the gaming industry lifespan wouldn't be extended. The PS2 to this day is still on the market selling. Imagine if Microsoft would have kept the Xbox on the market and the Wii, which is virtually an extension of the GameCube, we would still be in the 6th generation of gaming and possibly still having great quality games. Because overall, most of the games we've gotten in this generation, for the majority of them, have just been HD ports of past PS2 Xbox games. Ninja Gaiden Sigma on the PS3 is a port of an Xbox game. Devil May Cry 4 is just an HD version of Devil May Cry 3 on the PS2. Resident Evil 5 is just the HD version of Resident Evil 4 from the GameCube. The fighters we're seeing could have been done on the Xbox, could have been done on the GameCube. With the gaming industry trailing outside technology, when the PS3 and the Xbox 360 finally were to release, they would be cheaper than they actually are now. Because HD technology, all these things would have been on the market for years, and by now it's been cheaper to produce. So you're not paying $600 for a PS3. You're not paying what you pay for an Xbox 360. It'd be pretty much like a Wii, where basically you're paying for old technology, but at that point it's cheaper, so it can be mass produced. And you make money off your platforms, you make money off your hardware. But it brings back to just making the games. This makes developers better because they're spending long years mastering the hardware, making great software left and right. When you give developer time to make great games come. Instead, they're rushing. Every time they create one game, new technology's out, and they got to rush to master that technology. But they never master it. And that goes with the current state of motion controls. If Nintendo would have this whole generation by themselves, the motion control giant, and in the background, Sony and Microsoft both working on motion controls this year, but in the background, to finally release their versions in the next generation. Who to say that Kinect is not better than it actually is? Who to say Move is not a million times better? Because it wasn't rushed to the market. Instead, they were fine-tuning it, getting their software together, getting everything together. And so then the next generation is not the 3D generation, it's the motion control generation. Because everybody focuses on motion controls. And everybody's competing against motion control games and pushing everybody. And then finally, a year after that, we're finding the 3D generation. See, I just created 2 more generations, 20 more years of gaming consoles, just by tweaking that. Not being greedy, waiting and learning technology and not just forcing it. There's going to be naysayers who say, no, man, I'm glad technology like it is. I'm glad to get games like Uncharted 2 and Killzone 3 and God of War 3 and all those games, Halo Reaches and things of that nature. I'm glad to have technology push the games even further. But what happens in the next cycle of consoles, because technology hasn't advanced any further, we're still playing those same type of games. Those games play exactly the same. Nothing has been improved. They don't look any better. They don't play any better. So virtually they're just a sequel. But you're paying for the new hardware just to play that sequel. That's the problem. If technology is not being pushed so fast like it's being, we're paying for cheaper consoles and they're lasting a lot longer. And it's giving developers time to create and just work on making better games. So it's one of those things where slow and steady wins the race, at least overall, if you're a consumer. This is TheWon. I'll see you next time, real soon. Peace.